On the 6th of April, 1896, 1500 years after the Roman Emperor Theodosius decreed that all cult practices, including games, be stopped, the Olympic Games returned in its modern form thanks to Pierre de Coubertin and a few gentlemanly buddies. Welcome to the very first Olympipod with me, Chris O'Reilly, a below-average international athlete, and Ruth Fitzpatrick, an above-average international non-athlete. In each episode, we will take a deep, unofficial, and borderline acceptable dive into the world's favourite quadrennial multi-sport extravaganza, opening with the humble beginnings of Athens, 1896.
Chris.
Ruth.
You mentioned that the Olympics began on the, what was it, the 6th of April?
The 6th of April. Yes.
Yeah. What calendar was that, Chris?
That was on the Gregorian calendar.
It was, Chris. It was on the Gregorian calendar. Who did not know about that, Chris?
The Americans did not know about that, Ruth.
The Americans! The Americans did not know about that. Yeah, Team USA arrived in Athens on the 24th of March, believing that they had a good week and a half to prepare before the games opened. But they were awoken in the early hours of the next morning by a brass band outside their hotel on their way to the opening ceremony. Because, of course, the 6th of April is the 25th of March in the Julian calendar, which the Greeks use. Now, I'm going to have a bit of a full disclosure because, this podcast is going to be all about the facts, and far be it from me to introduce a fact that perhaps is not a fact. I do wonder if this story is a bit apocryphal. It does sound a bit, that they arrived in their hotel, checked in, didn't know that the Olympics would start the next day. So I came across one account that's slightly less dramatic, which says that the Americans did discover their mistake in Naples and then had 2 or 3 days to rush to Greece to make it on time. Either way, wasn't an ideal start for them. So let's hope that it's not a foreshadowing of our podcast. James Connolly, who I'm sure we will mention at some point in this epipod, was particularly irate about this, and he said that this was just further proof of the USA's provincialism.
Yes, and James Connolly's account of the whole thing is amazing. I mean, he wrote a book called Seaborn, 30 Years of Voyaging, and there's a couple of excerpts from that which detail that fact of them arriving on the day before, not knowing. When we get into James, we can maybe talk a bit more about his book and his views on the whole thing. That story is, as you said, there's a few different versions of it, and it's not quite as dramatic as the one in the short TV series which I watched about the whole Olympics, in which they only discovered once the Americans had left on the boat. But I don't want to delve into that too much because it is factually all over the place. And as you said, we want to try and stick to what facts we have from 1896.
Well, for the first episode anyway. After that, we can descend into madness, like the 1904 marathon. Chris, so how did the modern Olympic Games come about?
Where do we start? Shall we give the credit to Pierre de Coubertin?
Well, I think you give the credit to the Greeks, but yeah.
Well, yes, that's where the ancient Olympics came from, and but it was Pierre de Coubertin who seemed to drive the momentum towards having the games reinvented in what we know as its official and modern form. And we could go into real depth about the different versions of Olympic Games and other games which took place in the build-up to 1896, but we'll focus on Pierre de Coubertin, who really the only thing I knew about him before researching for this pod was, number one, there's a Spirit Medal awarded at every Olympics in his memory, and number two, Paris's handball team, PSG, play at the Pierre de Coubertin Arena, which is very old and not very exciting, which I guess really suits him down to the ground. But Pierre was a baron and, well, didn't have much to do, I guess, with his time. He had a bit of an interest in sport, but I don't think he was exactly obsessed with the idea of the Olympics. It wasn't until there was a couple of different people and couple of different occasions which inspired him to take up the thing that he would dedicate the rest of his life to, the Wenlock Olympic Games, which takes place in Shropshire in England to this day, I believe, still takes place.
Including a category in cricket, which is I'm a mad fan of that now.
William Penny Brooks is the gentleman at the Wenlock Olympian Games who helped inspire him. And there were a few other, I guess you could call them, classic scholars whose lectures and papers brought Pierre de Coubertin's attention.
I mean, the 19th century was full of romanticism about, the ancient times. And there was a lot of, I'm not sure they necessarily focused on kind of the more unsavory aspects of the ancient Olympics, but certainly there was a lot to be taking inspiration from in terms of that idea of the ideal physique. And then also internationalism, which was becoming a very strong political movement in the 19th century.
I think a man who inspired both Pierre de Coubertin and Evangelos Zappas, who we'll get to in a moment, is a poet called Panagiotis Soutsos, who in 1835 wrote about the ancient Olympics, or the Olympics as was just known then, and inspired this Zappas gentleman, a shipping merchant, to actually sponsor and create an Olympic Games of sorts in the mid-19th century, so way before this opening games, which I think the first one took place in 1859, which is a complete disaster. It was held over 3 Sundays. There were things like climbing up a greasy pole, for example, as one of the events.
Which is absolutely brilliant, though. That needs to be revived.
Well, yeah.
The greasy pole event.
Greasy pole or otherwise, there was one quote from the chronicler of the time who said, "There never was a more ridiculous affair than the comedy which took place at the Plateau Ludovicou, and one would err if we were to term it Olympic Games." So we shall not.
So we shan't. It shan't. This is it. This is an Olympipod. We're not doing any fake pretenders before this. No.
We shall not. So that's, I guess, where the inspiration came from. I think originally Pierre de Coubertin wanted to have the first Olympics in 1900 in Paris coincide with the Exposition Universelle, or the World Fair. Mm-hmm. But that was 6 years before the fact. And I guess the overwhelming idea was that they needed to have one beforehand. So they decided to go with 1896.
Yeah, and the modern Olympic Games and all of the revivals, there was this huge movement in Greece, especially after it got its independence, to have this event to kind of bring back that nationalism and that national pride. So, I mean, you mentioned Zappos. I mean, he was a Greek businessman who put a huge amount of money both in the Zappos Olympics and then also in the first Olympic Games in 1896.
So what did this first Olympic Games in 1896 look like, Ruth? What sports did we have? What kind of disciplines? Did we have anyone come from outside of Greece?
We did, Chris, we did. It was an international games. Actually, one of the things that I thought was quite interesting, because usually when you look at Olympic Games, especially quite far in the past, there's always these random sports in it that you're going, oh, that sounds brilliant or ridiculous. Actually, all of the sports that took place, 10 originally were meant to be there. It was 9 then after sailing got cancelled, are all sports that are still in the modern or in the 21st century Olympic Games. I will now recite them off the top of my head and alphabetically. Athletics, cycling, fencing, gymnastics, shooting, swimming, tennis, weightlifting, wrestling. And sailing was also to take place, but they were cancelled because of poor weather on the planned day of the competition. So all of those are still sports in the 21st century in the Olympics. There were definitely disciplines within it that are no longer featured, but all of the sports themselves are still featured.
Have we even spoken about the medals at these games and what people got?
We haven't. We probably should, because our absolute legions of fans after this first Olympipod will probably be tweeting at us saying, but there weren't that many medals. Ugh. So go on, Chris. Tell us about the medals.
When we're talking here about, we're talking about first, second and third place, so gold, silver and bronze medals, as the IOC has in its infinite wisdom rectified after the fact. So we're talking about what happened in 1996 as if it were the present and we had gold, silver and bronze. But back then there was a silver medal awarded to the winner and a bronze medal awarded to second place and diddly squat for anybody else. So alongside the silver medal that winners got, they also got a diploma and a crown of olive branches, while runners-up received a copper medal, a diploma, and the olive branches.
I think in the swimming, Alfred Hayot also got like this massive kind of like shield.
Oh.
Yeah, like it's pretty cool.
Didn't know that. Okay.
We'll push it up on our Twitter page for the legions of followers to have a look at.
That's what they got then, but we're talking about gold, silver, and bronze in the modern context, because even though third place at the time got nothing, we still like to consider them nowadays as being bronze medalists.
And pretty much anyone who didn't place for second or third has been completely lost to time. Like we don't know the names of every single person who competed, or indeed every single country that competed, because Chile claimed that they were there. Don't they, Chris?
Nah. Not buying it. Nobody else accepts that Chile were there. This guy was on none of the records.
Yeah, but do you remember his name?
No. Because he wasn't there. He wasn't there. Why would I learn about somebody who wasn't even there?
I did read somewhere that the Chilean government, at some stage in the last 20 years, actually hired a forensic pathologist who then went through all of the photos and, using modern face recognition, managed to like say that there was like a 50% chance that he was there because they maybe saw him in a grainy photo.
I like, he was supposed to have competed in the 100, 400 and 800 meters, if I'm not mistaken. And I think they were pretty well recorded. I think so. If he was there, this Chilean, 50% or otherwise, then I'm pretty sure we would have known.
Oh, and I've absolutely 100% just invented that percentage.
Okay, well, there you go.
just full disclosure.
So from those events you listed earlier as the first in the modern Olympic era, which was your favourite in 1896, Ruth?
It's weightlifting, Chris. It's weightlifting. Okay, people who know me know that weightlifting is my favourite spectator sport, because, there doesn't have to be an explanation, because it is just the sport of sports. There is nothing else to compete against it.
There's a couple of stories from weightlifting which I really like, and one in particular that is quite contentious, and it has to do with what many people would have considered at the time the most handsome gentleman at those 1896 Olympics, handsome Launceston Elliot from Scotland.
And I would recommend everybody to go Google him to have a look at his pictures. Now,
quite a man.
Different standards of beauty in those days. However, I would still recommend everyone go do that right now. Pause the podcast, Google it, come back to us, and we'll start again.
It's interesting you said his unusual standard of beauty. People were attracted apparently by his uncommon type of beauty, they said. He was the finest man of English birth, which I'm pretty sure the Scots would not be quite happy with. He even received an offer of marriage from a highly placed lady admirer.
He was also born in India.
He was born in India, but that's just a sign of the colonial past of Great Britain.
I do like that there was this throwaway fact about him starting to become a bodybuilder at the age of 13, when somebody commented that he was a particularly well-built 13-year-old, which, I don't know now if you could... I'd really like to see a picture of him at 13.
Okay.
What did he look like?
What we do know is that he was a very good lifter in his adult life, and he shared the medals with a man called Viggo Jensen of Denmark. And this is where the contentious part comes in. There were two events which they both competed in, basically clean and jerk style weightlifting. One of them was two-handed lifting. One of them was one-handed lifting. And in the two-handed lifting, which took place first, both Launceston Elliot and Viggo Jensen lifted the same weight, but the jury, including Prince George as the chairman of the jury, ruled that Jensen had done so in a better style, which was not part of the judging thing. And my problem here is that, wasn't Prince George Danish?
Oh, God. Well,
I mean, he's Greek, but he's Danish.
this just sounds like the 2016 boxing. Like, it shows that nothing has changed.
Yeah, so they tried to have a tiebreaker afterwards. Unfortunately, both lifters were unable to actually improve on their weights with the tiebreaker. So they went back to the style version in the end, and Viggo Jensen picked up the gold medal there. Almost immediately afterwards, though, there was the one-handed lift, and Handsome Launceston got his revenge because Viggo Jensen had injured his shoulder in the extended lifts of the two-handed one. So Elliott got his gold medal in the end. He also competed in the 100-meter sprint. He finished third in his heat and did not qualify for the final. He also tried his hand at wrestling, and he was beaten in the first round by Karl Schumann of Germany, who was also the gymnastic champion. And he also tried to compete at the rope climbing event within gymnastics and finished in last place. He tried his hand at a few things. Turns out he was very much a weightlifter.
Yeah, to be fair, a lot of the athletes at these early modern Olympics really did put their hands to quite a few different sports in, very varied disciplines. They were mostly, for the most part, gentlemen of they didn't have a huge amount to do, so they just became kind of good at sport in lots of different. They could run, they could run up a rope.
Well, that's the only way you could qualify for this Olympics. First of all, have the means to get there, and the Americans, for example, they needed a bit of help getting over there. They were gentlemen, so to speak, mostly college athletes at the time, but the British, who barely had any athletes come over, most of them came from the British Embassy in Greece, but there was even contention about them participating, but because they worked for a living, that they weren't true gentlemen and amateurs. So it's really was just a pursuit of the rich at the time and just a bunch of lads trying out a bunch of different sports.
Well, on that subject, so Alfred Hayos, who was the Hungarian swimmer, he had to take time off university to come to the games, and he was quite chastised by his university when he came back with his 2 gold medals. They said to him, "I hope you're not expecting any congratulations. We'll wait until you finish your exams before we give those." But at the Athens Games, there was no stadium for the swimming events. They decided that this was just an unnecessary expense, so they were all entirely staged in the open sea. This was not a very pleasant experience for anyone involved. The water was freezing, and competitors had to contend with 4-meter waves. He won 2 of the 3 swimming events, the 100-meter and the 1200-meter freestyle. All of the 3 events, the 500 as well, took place one after another, or else he would have gone for the 3 events. He really wanted to win the 3 gold, but it just wasn't practical to go 100, 500, 1200. Before the 1200, he had kind of got the feel for the water in the 100. He decided that he was going to have to take some action to be able to stay in the water for that long. So he smeared himself in a 1 centimetre thick layer of grease.
Oh, yeah.
He stated afterwards, "My will to live completely overcame my desire to win." Quite a few of his opponents had to be fished out of the sea, frozen, because they had not smeared themselves in 1 centimetre thick of grease. He did become an architect, and a very, very famous architect, and in fact he designed the main Hungarian swimming centre, which is named after him. But he went to take the silver for architecture at the 1924 Paris Olympics, when arts were still part of the Olympiads. He's the only person to win a medal in both art and athletics at the Olympics.
Did you know, Ruth, that silver should have been a gold?
Well, I know they didn't award a gold.
Do you know why?
I don't.
Because it was in 1924 in Paris, and the French didn't want to give a gold medal to a foreigner. So he actually he was the winner. They just didn't award a gold medal in that competition, in which he designed a plan for the Olympic Stadium.
I do really like how there used to be art at the Olympics. I think that's something we could definitely bring back. Or like in the ancient Greek when they had a class for trumpeting. I would have liked a trumpeting section to make a comeback at 2020.
Well, you might be able to have your way, at least within this podcast universe, at the end of the show, Ruth. I'll get to that one.
Okay, interesting. A bit of a tease there.
Exactly. Hajos, he also played football for Hungary. Very talented man. And I think one of the saddest and most interesting parts of his story is why he began swimming in the first place. And that was after his father had drowned in the Danube. That somehow inspired him to take up swimming, apparently. And accomplished swimmer, European champion and Olympic champion, great footballer as well.
I do like, there was this anecdote that I think he said the prince asked him, how did he learn how to swim? And he responded, in the water.
That's great. Is he your favourite athlete at these games?
I do quite like him, I have to say. And do you know that his brother was in the 1906 Olympics too, swimming?
Oh, the not Olympics.
We'll get to that when we get to that. Yes. So yeah, the very accomplished family, but yeah, him himself, as you said, he played for his country in football. He was also manager of the Hungarian football team, I think, at some point. Oh. Very, very skilled architect. Yeah, so he was. I think he would be one of my favourite of the games. If you can truly have a favourite.
It's a tough call. I think I've got like a short list of 3, I would say. No, I won't say 3. 3. It's a 3-way tie for me between James Connolly, John Boland and Robert Garrett. Which one do you want to hear about first?
They all have a bit of an Irish lilt to them, do they?
Well, Garrett, I don't know, does he?
I don't know.
They're American, of course.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, start at the very beginning.
We'll start with the very first modern Olympic champion then, shall we? And
yes.
That's James B. Connolly. As you said, he's got a bit of an Irish connection, and his parents came from the Aran Islands in Ireland and moved over to Boston, where he was born. He was one of 12 children.
Seems about right.
Yeah, he worked for most of his life, deciding to work instead of going to high school. But at some point, he decided that he wasn't happy with his career and that he was going to take up different paths. So he was self-taught, turned out to be quite a good student, and managed to get himself accepted to study classics at Harvard University, which is where we begin our story of James Connolly going to these Olympics. He went to the chairman of the athletic committee in Harvard about going, and basically they told him to get lost, that he was going to go to Athens on a junket just for a bit of a lark, and they told him, well, all you can do basically is leave, resign your position at Harvard, and when you come back, you can apply again. Well, to that he said, he's done with Harvard. Good day, sir. And he decided to go to Athens, no longer a student. He managed to get some support to go. Some people claim that he paid his own way. Others claim that he got a bit of support from the Irish-American community and the athletic community in Boston. Either way, he ended up in Athens on the day before the games starting. And this is where I want to jump into an excerpt from his book, which I mentioned before, 30 Years of Voyaging. Tom Barry, a chum of mine, was making a joyride of the trip, and he said, lucky thing you've got 12 days to get in shape before the opening of the games. We were at breakfast when 2 members of the committee entered and passed around programs for the day. I glanced casually at my program, and then less casually. Here was a business. The date for the opening of the games was today, and according to the Greek calendar, not ours. There were no 12 days left for our training. The games opened that very day. Zoop, said I, after 6,000 miles and 16 days of travel, some of us would have to compete that very day. The trial heats of the 100 metres would be held, and Garrett of Princeton and I were in for the trials and the finals both. Garrett in the discus and I in the triple saute. Hop, step and jump, or 2 hops and a jump.
I am very impressed that my opening fact actually is corroborated by evidence. I am really delighted with
I'm
that.
glad to be of service.
It wasn't just pure bullshit. I'm delighted. There's hope for the podcast.
There is hope. And now we'll move forward to later that day on his first jump. Now, as mentioned in the previous paragraph, the triple saute or the triple jump was either a hop, step and a jump or 2 hops and a jump. And that's important as we read into this one. I breathed on my hands, rubbed them dry in my jersey, gripped them hard, and sprinted for the takeoff. And here's one for the psychologists. I came to Athens all set to do a hop, step, and jump, yet in that stadium that day, in contest for an Olympic championship, I shifted at the last moment to a 2 hops and a jump, which I had not jumped since I was a boy competing against other boys. Now, the rules at the time forbade the judges to tell the competitors how far they'd actually jumped.
Ooh.
But the track coach of the London Athletic Club, a gentleman named Perry, was smoothing the earth in the pit after each jump. And after my second try, I said to him, they ought to let a fella know how far he jumps. And his answer was, as far as you're concerned, you can go back to your dressing room and take your bath. You have this event in your pocket right now. When the other 2 finalists were done, the judges checked up, and Prince George of Greece, the chief field judge and the one who talked English, came to me saying, you are the victor. You have beaten the second man by a metre. The thought next came to me that our national hymn was for me winning my event. To myself I said, you're the first Olympic victor in 1,500 years. A moment later, the gang back home will be tickled when they hear of it. And that is the story of James Connolly and our first modern Olympic champion. And he followed it up with a second place finish in the high jump and third place in the long jump as well. So quite the jumper was young Irish-American James Connolly. He left speechless.
I was trying to remember back to the film. Is Angela Lansbury his mum?
No,
Okay.
Angela Lansbury is Robert Garrett's mum.
Okay, let's hear about Robert Garrett and his mum, who solved murders in her small village. And was a teapot.
James Connolly was played by that redheaded man who ended up in CSI Miami, I think. Quite a famous actor.
Yeah. I'll be perfectly honest, Chris. I saw the 5-minute snippet you sent me. I didn't go immediately to go find the film.
Well, the fact that you thought it was 5 minutes when it was in fact about 30 seconds says everything you need to know about that. But I sat through I think it was 3 hours, 50 minutes of it.
Brilliant.
And then discovered that an awful lot of it had nothing to do with history. Robert Garrett, he really spoiled the party for the Greeks, to be fair, because he won the discus and the shot put, and the Greeks believe that the
mortifying
discus was their event. I mean, they were expecting to run away with it. Nobody could beat them. They were the kings of the discus.
You're not meant to run away with the discus.
No, well...
You're meant to just go spin around in a circle.
He spun around and threw it further than the rest. The funny thing about it is that when he was I think he studied at Princeton, and they had only seen pictures of the events. They didn't know how big a discus was, and so they had a discus made which was 10 kilograms heavy, which is about 5 times the weight of the actual discus. So when he actually saw what he had to throw in the end, it was like, all right, happy days. Then and he ended up winning. It wasn't too comfortably, but he won the event. But beforehand, he wasn't even thinking about competing because he thought that he had no chance because he was throwing this 10 kilogram discus and wasn't getting very far with it. So he ended up winning, much to the dismay of the Greeks, and he ended up winning the shot put as well. He also competed in 1900, which we'll speak about in the 1900 podcast in the next one.
Yeah, it's the more suitable place to start talking about 1900. The 1900s podcast.
And his story there is quite interesting.
Okay, let's get on to the next person. Come on.
Well, I'm not even finished on Garrett. I mean,
oh my God, okay.
Oh, well, or is it? Am I finished on Garrett? Let me see. No, I think that's it. I don't really have many notes on him. Garrett, a great man in the field. Turns out to be not such a great man in real life, despite his love of archaeology. Not so good on the human rights aspect of things, but it was the 19th century. So... Do you want to know?
Okay. I mean, you're really leaving us hanging there, but okay, we'll do our own research. Go on, last person.
John Mary Pius Boland. Now,
he was actually Irish.
He was actually Irish.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, due to Ireland being a part of the UK, his medals belong to Great Britain. But John Boland didn't even have any intention to compete at the Olympics. He was a bit of a classics student as well. He studied in Oxford and he was visiting Athens.
He competed in the tennis, didn't he?
He did. He went to Athens originally for a bit of fun, to check out the games and to check out Greece, which he'd studied so much about. And he was having dinner one evening with a tennis player, Dionysius Kastigas, who convinced him to take part in the tennis event because there weren't many people actually taking part. So the tennis event itself turned out to be a bit of a mishmash of people who were specialists in other sports and John Boland himself, who didn't even really like tennis. He was more of a golf and a cricket man. He did play tennis recreationally, but he once described the sport in his journal as decidedly inferior to cricket. Nevertheless, he went on to play. He found some trousers. He found a tennis bat of sorts, but he had to play in his normal heeled leather shoes. That didn't stop him, though. He ended up winning both the singles and the doubles event. And in the final of both events, he beat the man who convinced him to take part, Dionysius Kastigas. And there's a bit of a rumour as well that John Boland requested that the Irish flag was prepared to run up the pole alongside the Union Jack. He didn't mention that in his personal journal, though, so who knows whether that's true or just a bit of propaganda. He ended up being an MP for South Kerry in the British Parliament and was a big advocate of preserving the Irish language. And very fittingly, he then died on St. Patrick's Day in 1958.
Chris, do you think you would have won at the 1896 Olympics?
In tennis?
Anything, Chris. If we could bring you there, do you think you would have won something? And if so, what would you have won? I wouldn't have been allowed to compete, but to be perfectly honest, I probably wouldn't have won anything anyway. Would you have won something at the 1896 Olympics?
Oh,
Come on, Chris. I'm putting you on the spot.
Yes, I would win something.
Okay, and would you come first, or is it just like you'd place, but you wouldn't get a medal because I didn't have medals, but yeah.
I would have fancied myself in the tennis doubles alongside John Boland.
Okay.
To win gold. A truly Irish gold medal. He ended up competing in the doubles with a German, I believe. So it was a mixed medal for the UK and Germany. So yeah, I would have fancied. I'm a decidedly below, if I said I was a below average international athlete in the beginning of this podcast, I'm a bad tennis player. But I think I would have done okay in 1896.
Yeah. I won't ask you this question every Olympipod, but just, 1896, I think that would have been a really good shot for you.
Yeah, it would have been my chance. I mean, if I was a gentleman and had the means, then I would have fancied my chances of winning something. I would have competed in, I would have been like these guys. I would have competed in everything.
Yeah, like, I know, and like you would have gone into the rope climbing, even though you had never seen a rope. And, obviously, there was no greasy pole, so you couldn't do the greasy pole. But, I presumably you would do the 100 metre and the 400 metre. 800
metres was my speciality growing up.
Okay.
And I think I would have gone for that. I mean, I'm definitely not a 12-second sprinter, that's for sure.
Also, Chris, we don't have to transport you here, transport you there as a 30-year-old. We can go and bring you at 22 if you like.
Okay. Pre my first of 3 knee surgeries. Okay, let's do that. Okay, good. Okay, then I definitely win something. 21-year-old me, pre knee surgeries, would have won something. Oh, that's a big call.
Yeah, I
know. You've tricked me into. Oh God, yeah. All right, I'm sticking to it.
Once the lockdown is down, I'm going to start timing you.
Yeah, no, mixed doubles. No, not mixed doubles. Pure doubles. Pure doubles. Me and John Boland, we would have come away with victory.
A brand new discipline that came in was the marathon, because there wasn't a marathon before the 1896 Games. It was created obviously as a nod to the original Olympics and to the Greek myth of the first marathon. But because of that, we're going to talk about a lot of different marathons, because a running theme through the early Olympics is the absolute batshit craziness of the marathon event. Most of the competitive races in the 19th century, they very rarely went over the 5K mark. And there was actually a huge debate before the event as to whether it was even ethical or possible to stage a race of this distance. There were also dubious reports at the time that 3 Greek athletes had died during the training process because the Greeks really wanted to win this event. They really felt that this was their event. There were 17 athletes, 13 from Greece.
So the Greeks really needed to win this. There was a lot of pressure building because they weren't winning any of the events that were considered primetime events. They were winning a few minor gold medals, not really catching the public's imagination. And there's a claim that George Averoff, a very rich man who helped to basically save the Olympics, and I think he had 1 million drachmas invested to actually make the games happen. He offered the hand of his daughter and another 1 million or 100,000. There's a few varying sources here, as a dowry, as well as the hand of his daughter to a Greek winner, if they could do it. So there was a lot riding on this, and amateurism is gone out the window at this stage, and the pressure was on for the Greeks to win.
Yeah, as I said, this was a very arduous task for anybody because it was just such an unknowable distance. And a number of the competitors collapsed or bowed out along the way. Edwin Flack, the Australian, who'd won both the 800 and 1500 a few days before, collapsed with only a few kilometres to go. And one of the other front runners for much of the early stages, Alban Lemresu, dropped out just after the 32-kilometre mark. But then by some accounts, he actually reached the halfway point in 55 minutes, which,
bonkers.
Yes, like maybe he should have reserved some of that for the final 10. Possibly they should have had a look at the strategy of the eventual Greek winner, Spiridon Louis, who decided to stop off to visit his future father-in-law's tavern for a glass of cognac around kilometre 25. He also had a very interesting approach to pre-race nutrition. He fasted the night before, just so that he could concentrate on prayer, and then ate a whole chicken the morning of the race.
Protein and God. That's all you need.
Protein and God. What else do you need?
And a bit of cognac as well.
And a bit of cognac, yeah. And so, as you said, this was an event that the Greeks really wanted to win, and they did. Initially, they took first, second, and third place. However, Spiridon Belokas, the third place finisher, was disqualified. Now, Chris, this is going to be a bit of a tease for Olympipod number 3. But why was Spiridon Belokas disqualified?
Tell me, Ruth.
It was for a similar reason why someone else was disqualified in a marathon that was going to take place 8 years later. He was disqualified because he undertook some of the race in a horse and carriage.
There was the Hungarians who protested afterwards, right? Because they originally thought that, yes, it was a clean sweep, 1, 2, 3 for Greece, but Belokas was a dirty little cheater.
However, the other Spiridon, though, he did become a national hero on winning this. And you said that he was offered a dowry. He didn't take it, but he did receive a huge number of gifts and endorsements. Those included wine, free haircuts for life, clothes, and from a chocolate factory, £2,000 of chocolate.
But all he wanted was a cart to carry his water to and from the well for the rest of his life. So he was a real...
And he was later jailed for fraud.
Yes, but only for 1 year, right?
Only for 1 year. So it obviously wasn't that bad a fraud. And just as an aside, the very next day, a woman, Stamata Raviti, ran the marathon. She wasn't allowed. She had been told that there were American women there that she could compete against, but that race never transpired. So she ran it herself in 5 hours, 30 minutes. And at the end, she found witnesses to attest to her time. So, not the first official female representative at the Olympics, but the first unofficial.
Didn't take much longer for women to actually take part in the Olympics. They got there a few years later. If Pierre de Coubertin had his own way, they probably never would have competed.
Yeah, he didn't. He thought it kind of it would affect the men and affect the purity of the Olympic Games, which
impractical, uninteresting, unaesthetic, and simply incorrect. But women did get there eventually, but they'd have to wait until 1984 to actually compete at the marathon event, which is quite incredible. So well done to Stamata Ravithi. There was another mystery woman as well, Melpomene, which...
was there, Chris?
No, there wasn't. There wasn't.
No. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut across your fact quite so. But sorry, please tell me about this mystery woman.
Ruth, it is not a fact because it is a lie.
Yeah.
And I think stories of Melpomene, this mystery other runner, I think she was supposed to have competed before the Olympics.
Okay.
That only came up like 10, 20 years later. So yeah, there was only one woman. I think my favorite bit of the marathon story is right at the end, though, where a crowd of 100,000 people were there to welcome Spiridon Louis in, and the Greek crown princes jumped onto the track and ran alongside him as he stumbled his way to victory. So that just showed how big an occasion it was for the Greeks to finally win.
Chris, I was very surprised. I was very surprised at how much I enjoyed the shooting at the Rio 2016. You know, I kind of went there because tickets were relatively cheap because nobody wants to go see the shooting. And it was the clay shooting. Very, very enjoyable.
Well, tell us about the shooting of 120 years earlier.
I actually wasn't there for that one. However, the Payne brothers, John and Sumner, really kind of swept the board. But this was because they brought much superior guns. So they won by, I think, quite a ridiculous margin compared to the others. John Payne took the 25-metre military pistol gold, and he dropped out of the 30-metre free pistol to allow his brother to take the gold in that.
That's only fair, I think.
Yeah.
And that's because, well, Sumner, his brother, didn't even know he was going to the Olympics until he was picked up by John in Paris one day.
Okay.
So John Payne was planning on going all along. He was based in the US. He was a Harvard graduate, and he decided that the Americans could do with one more shooter. So he was going to pick up his unsuspecting brother, Sumner, who was based in Paris. He didn't contact his brother in advance. He didn't tell him about the Olympic Games. John simply showed up at Sumner's office in Paris, and Sumner then wrote about this. The last of March, I came home to luncheon one day and found my brother, Lieutenant J.B. Payne, sitting in my office. I had not the slightest idea that he was on this side of the pond. When does the next train start for Athens? Said he. I don't know, said I. Well, he said, find out and get your revolvers and we will go there, for the Boston Athletic Association has sent a team over. And, well, we may be able to help them out. So the pair gathered as many guns as they could possibly get their hands on because they weren't sure what type of events and what type of guns they would need, and about 3,500 rounds of various ammunition just in case. And they went to Athens to destroy the rest of the field.
5 years later, Sumner came home to find his wife in bed with one of his daughter's teachers. So he shot at him 4 times, missing him each time. He was briefly jailed and charged with assault, but he was actually eventually let off the more serious charge of manslaughter because they decided if he really wanted to shoot him, he could have shot him.
Exactly. And I have the Olympic medals to prove it. Glorious. Ruth, question for you.
Okay, give it to me.
Was the sabre event in fencing fixed?
It has been mentioned in passing that it was, and I don't know. Was it, Chris?
Well, fixed is maybe one way to put it.
Because the Greeks did get they did place first and second, didn't they?
They did place first and second, and Felix Adolf Schmal from Austria got royally screwed over, I think it is fair to say. Whether it was fixed or otherwise, he got screwed over. And I'll tell you a little bit about little Felix. He had competed in the 100-kilometer cycling race the day before this event, but he didn't finish it. The next day, he was competing in this sabre event, and he was looking pretty good to finish in a top 2 or 3, seeing as he'd won both of his opening bouts. However, then entered the king and the crown prince alongside him and their whole entourage, and the officials decided that they were going to start the event over again so they could enjoy it all.
I'm sorry, you knew what time it started at. Just arrive on time. It's the Olympics.
Unbelievable. So they decided to start it all over again. Felix Adolf Schmal with, the better part of a 100-kilometer race behind him the previous day, winning the first 2 rounds here out of 4. Completely wiped clean off the slate. They had to start again, and he only won 1 of the 4 bouts after that. And he ended up in 4th place behind the Greek duo of Ioannis Georgidas and Telemachos Karakolas, as well as the Danish Holger Nielsen, who is a big name for all of the handball fans of the Olympipod. I'm sure there will be at least 7 of them listening.
Also for big fans of external cardiopulmonary resuscitation.
I'm not too sure how many of those we're going to get straight into our podcast, but if it weren't for the king, the crown prince and his entourage coming in and restarting, then Schmal would have actually been in a 3-way tie for first place. But in the end, he finished in 4th. He eventually got some glory in the Olympics, though, on the saddle, back on the bike, because he won the 12-hour cycling race. And, well, he finished 3rd in both the 333 meters time trial and the 10-kilometer race. So cycling, it seems, was his forte, but also not too bad with the sabre.
There are a lot of events that I think, deserve to come back, but the 12-hour cycling race is not one of them. Absolutely nobody needs that.
No. I mean, how far can you go in 12 hours? Come on. And I believe...
Or are you going round and round, maybe?
I believe Schmal was pretty sneaky in this.
Oh.
He lapped the field really early in the race and then just kept pace right behind the second place guy for the next, 11 hours.
Well, I'm not sure that's sneaky. I think that's just clever.
Well, very clever, yes.
I think that's the right way to do it. If I could cycle, I think that's how I would do the men's.
You could cycle for
12-hour race.
For 12 hours. Oh my God.
Would you be arsed is my question.
Yeah. So the gentleman who finished ahead of Schmal in 3rd place in the sabre, Holger Nielsen, I want to speak about him for a moment as well, because besides finishing 3rd in the fencing, he got a silver and a bronze, or 2nd and 3rd place in the shooting competitions. And he also took part in the discus. He was a multiple sport athlete, but he's probably most famous in modern sport as being the man who is credited with developing an early set of rules for handball in 1898. Although the Germans would like to think otherwise. The Germans believe that they came up with handball, and they won't thank me for this, but it was definitely Holger Nielsen. And as he said, he also developed a form of external cardiopulmonary resuscitation in 1932.
I'm sorry to keep on harking over this, but fencing is also really the kind of sport that you can really drop in on. You really don't need to start it at the beginning. It doesn't have this massive narrative. You can just go in and watch individual matches. So I don't think this needs to be restarted.
No.
I just want to put that officially on record.
Yeah, and it's another example of a Dane benefiting from it, thanks to a Greek/Danish king.
Crafty Danes.
That's what I take away from this Olympics. They only had 2 athletes, the Danes, but by George did they benefit with King George.
Absolutely shocking. I can't believe that the Olympics would be corrupted in such a way.
Well, it's only the beginning. It's only the beginning. Our final section of this podcast, and every podcast from now on in Olympipod, will be the sport swap, in which one of us, or a guest, and in this case you, will decide which of the modern Olympic sports will be kicked out of the program and which sport you're going to bring in.
So, do you know, this was a difficult one for the first one. Because, first of all, there was nothing in the 1896 that we want to save. Like, all of the original sports are still there. There were a couple of different disciplines, but no, I'm fine with that. So, I am going to go for tug of war. I want tug of war back in the Olympics. There's a governing body of tug of war, the TWIF, the Tug of War International Federation. There are 53 member nations of the TWIF, so this is a truly global sport. It has precedence because it was a 5 times an Olympic sport from 1900 to 1920. And it remains a recognised sport by the IOC. There would be a few things that I would change from the original Olympic form of it. So nations were allowed to enter a couple of different teams if they wanted to, which meant that some years countries had a complete monopoly on medals. So like one year, America got gold, silver and bronze because they had different teams. They also had no weight classes back then, which has now been changed. The TWIF has changed that. I went onto the TOWA website, which is the UK's national body for tug of war, and found the following mission statement. The TOWA consider that tug of war certainly warrants reintroduction into the Olympic Games. The rules are easy to understand and the sport is spectator friendly. In addition, the results do not depend on subjective scoring by a panel of judges. Looking at you, boxing. Tug of war is accessible to everyone at all levels, as the sport does not require a large amounts of costly equipment, space, or bespoke sports stadia. Faster, higher, stronger is the Olympic motto, and tug of war certainly fits the bill. The Tug of War Association remains hopeful that one day tug of war will take centre stage on the world's largest sporting platform. Well, TOWA, you have our support. You have the official support of the Olympipod.
And which sport would you take out?
This is difficult, Chris. So originally I was thinking, because it would probably fit under athletics, I could just take out something from the track and field event. So I was thinking, nobody likes the 10,000 meters, not even people in the 10,000 meters. So let's just get rid of that. But then when I was looking at it, it turns out that tug of war was its own sport. It didn't go under athletics or under track and field. So I'm going to have to take out one of the actual big ones. And look, I've already said there's an issue with boxing, but I feel like that's too easy. I think like I would get a lot of accusations of snobbery if I said BMX. Obviously, basketball doesn't deserve to be there. Why is tennis there?
Oh, well. I was at basketball in 2012. I went to BMX and tennis in 2016. Both were brilliant. But please.
I love tennis too, but I'm just not sure it fits into the amateur spirit. And I know the 21st century Olympic Games, look, I'm not picking tennis, so don't worry. It's a very safe one to go for the first Olympipod, but I suppose I'll go with golf. I don't think we'll lose any of our 10 listeners if I go with golf at this stage.
Fair enough. Is there any particular reason why?
I mean, everything. That's my reason. Everything to do with golf at the Olympics. No one, literally, the golfers didn't want to be there. So, why would we want to watch it? So, no, we're taking out golf. We're putting in tug of war. Do you even know who won it? Who won in 2016?
Justin Rose, was it?
I don't know.
If I'm right here, let's do a quick church. I don't know who won the women's one, but I think it was either Justin Rose or the Swede. Justin Rose ahead of Henrik Stenson. Yes, okay. Can I say something about tug of war?
Go for it.
How I would like to see tug of war reintroduced into the Olympics, and it would be a bit like in its early days, like in 1900. that there wouldn't be a fixed team for it that would train for it.
What?
You would set a day aside, maybe like the real final day of the Olympics would be the tug of war day, and you draw out different sports, and one athlete from each sport would go and represent their country in the tug of war team. So you'd have like a rugby player, a shot putter, alongside a diver and a golf player.
And a gymnast.
And a gymnast.
Okay, does every country, so there's 8 people on the team, if they pull out a gymnast, does that mean everyone has to put a gymnast on?
Yes.
Yeah. But now what about countries that want to compete that or don't have a wide range? Because then obviously like the Americans are going to do much better than everyone else, or the Chinese, like countries that have massive teams. So no, Chris, you're absolutely wrong. We are like absolutely not. It's not your sport to introduce. By all means, another week you can take out my tug of war and you can put in your bastardized tug of war hybrids. However, absolutely not. Get away from my tug of war.
I don't think it would make the Americans, for example, better because they wouldn't have any training.
Chris, I don't want our podcast to be destroyed on the first episode because we fall out over this. You are wrong. Okay, fine. It looks fine on paper. It would never work. We're gonna have and also like the poor International Federation of Tug Wars. Like they've been training. They go to the European Championships or the World Championships of Tug of War, and like you're now saying that, oh no, we're gonna get other people to do it. No, you're wrong.
Ruth, if there's one thing I've learned in the previous few months, it's that describing a sport you know nothing about and making it seem as easy as possible is the surefire way to get attention for your podcast. And on that note, I rest my case.
Do we have a beef? I don't know.
We soon will. Just you wait. Wait till the tug of war kids come.
Oh my goodness. Okay. No, yeah, they're going to come after you though. I'm fine. I believe in the orthodoxy of tug of war. And actually, I'm going to be really looking forward to talking about tug of war in 1904 in our 3rd Olympipod.
All I'm doing is stirring the pot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we'll have the tug of wars and the 10,000 meter athletes coming after us.
And we'll have a new one of these in every single Olympipod until we completely destroy the Olympic program. And we'll have an updated list as we go on.
And people can follow us on Twitter so they can have a look and see at because I believe you very ambitiously said that you were going to create a table for all of these new sports.
Oh, yes.
So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that table, which we will put up on our Twitter at Olympipods. And do we have an Instagram? We do. Okay, also I think that is also at Olympipod because for some reason that domain was never taken.
So time will tell.
Time will tell if we get sued.
After all of this and the glowing success that Athens was in 1896, the Greeks wanted to have it again. They wanted to keep the Olympics at home, but indeed they had to wait another 10 years for the now pointless intercalated games and 108 years for the real deal to come back to Greece. Well, lucky for you, Olympipod listeners, you're not going to have to wait that long if you want another episode, because we'll be back with the second Olympipod in just a few days' time. You're not even going to have to wait 2 weeks for the next pod, because we're going to bring you the next one on Monday.
We do appreciate how difficult a time this is for many, many people with the Olympics being postponed. So we're going to try and drip feed you as many pointless facts as possible. Also, the interesting point, did the 1900 Olympics even happen? Will our next podcast even happen? Only time will tell. Fantastic.
Now that is a cliffhanger.